So I go live. We are live. I never know how long it takes, but let's consider it's good now. So hi everyone and welcome to this live Q&A with Godot Engine core developers. So we have a pretty big team today for the Q&A. Some of them you already know if you've been attending to previous Q&As. And we have two new guests today, which are Bastiaan Olij, who started working full-time on Godot in February, and Joan Fons, who will start working full-time on Godot on Monday. So that's actually a piece of news because we haven't announced it officially yet. So you're the first ones to know, but we will soon have a blog post about that, detailing a bit more what he's going to be working on, but he's also going to talk about it now. So I propose that we start with a short session where both Bastiaan and Joan are going to present what they're working on. And while they're talking, feel free to ask questions about what they're talking about so that we can ask them directly those questions afterwards. So make sure to use the exclamation point question prefix when asking question. I'll show an example, so that it's easy for us to spot them in the chat and then remember to actually ask them. So use exclamation mark question and we'll hopefully notice it and answer you. So let's start with Bastiaan.
Hello, everyone. I hope my mic is on now. My name is Bastiaan Olij, for those people who don't know me yet. Currently living in Australia, Sydney, but originally from Europe, the Netherlands. Well, I've been doing XR support in Godot for the last 3 years in my spare time. And well, a couple of months ago, we broke the news that that I was able to do this now full-time and paid thanks to a wonderful grant from Facebook Reality Labs. And that is therefore also going to be my main area of attention, is making sure that VR support and AR support in Godot evolves and gets better. We are obviously currently in a state where VR and AR support only exists in Godot 3. So that is the first protocol, is making sure that we bring Godot 4 up to speed and make sure that we can do VR and AR in Godot 4. Next to that, I've been asked to get involved in helping John out with the renderer, seeing that I have quite some years of OpenGL experience under my belt. I'm still learning Vulkan a little bit, but you know, we'll get up to speed on that and hopefully be able to help out and yeah, make Godot an even better engine in that respect, and just being hands-on in other things. There's lots of areas that I play around with. People might also know that I do a bunch of tutorials. I've got my own YouTube channel where I do tutorials for Godot as well. So that's an area that I'm busy with, and that's really it. I think so. And unless one of my co-workers has some things that they want to ask me right away, I'd say I'll ask JFonS to take over.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Juan. I'm from Barcelona, and I also been contributing to Godot for the last 3 years or so. A couple of years ago, I started working as a consultant at Prehensile Fales, but now there's the funds for Godot to hire me as a full-time developer. My overall focus will be on rendering. I've done some contributions to rendering, the 3D editor, and lately the CPU line mapper for 3.2. And the plan is to continue going forward with that. I will probably work first on implementing occlusion cooling for 4.0, which I know there's lots of people waiting for it, so I hope I can deliver. And after that, well, basically bug fixing 4.0 and improvements that can be done there, mainly on the rendering part. And yeah, feel free to ask questions.
So then we have a first question for Bastiaan, which is, you touched on it lightly, but what's the current state of XR support for Godot 4.0?
All right. So simply put, like I said, right now VR support is mainly in Godot 3. We haven't had any time yet to start working on making the Vulkan renderer work with VR. There is some rework that we need to do. I actually started on that this week. I started on the first few steps in cleaning some code up. We have a lot of refactoring to do because the structure that we have in VR was designed 3 years ago when the VR landscape was still pretty unknown. There's a lot of things that have changed over the last 3 years where we've added some of that logic to plugins, and it now needs to find its way back into the core. So my immediate plan for the next probably 2 to 3 months is going to be to concentrate on OpenXR support in Godot and start off with having OpenXR support in the core, just because there's a bunch of things around GDNative that need to improve before we can do everything that we need to do as plugins. Long term, we will see whether OpenXR support stays in the core or goes back to being a plugin. That all depends on decisions that we're going to be making in the future, especially around how much support for VR we want to have in the editor itself. But yeah, expect in the next month or two to start seeing the first functional parts of OpenXR working in the Godot 4 master branch. Or at least in a PR that people can start testing out. So yeah, hopefully we will start seeing some VR support in Godot 4 very quickly.
Nice. A question for Joan, maybe. I don't know yet if you will know what's the plan for that or if there's any plan, but currently 2D lighting shadows are infinite. Will we have a way to specify occluder height to limit them? E.g. for the sun being high up in the sky or a ceiling lamp in 2D top-down games?
So for
I know that you have two Joan and Juans, so.
Oh, sorry,
but Juan implemented the 2D shadow, so he will probably know better.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. So directional 2D shadows are infinite because they are meant to be infinite. This way, if you have like an occluder off screen, you can still cast shadows to something that is within screen. So if you want to have something that resembles a height or something like that, the best way to do it right now is with the new SDF feature. With the new SDF feature, you can simulate occluder height. So you can have like directional shadows with a fixed lens that only goes far as some pixels or something like that, and still do it very efficiently, even if it was kind of like a drop shadow, but much longer without any kind of efficiency cost. So yeah, that's what the new SDF is going to be for.
So I have a question for the Vulkan crowd. I don't know who yet knows what the answer could be, but there's a question on whether we're going to improve the Vulkan buyers, because apparently we use a lot of subsequent calls to VK command pipeline buyer, and apparently Vulkan guys recommend to batch those into one call. That's pretty.
Let me check because I
technical.
didn't understand the question. To Vulkan what?
To Vulkan buyers, like to batch
them
yeah, into a single call instead of setting several of them.
No, that's what this has been done a few weeks ago.
Cool. But yeah, there's a lot of work being done right now on further reorganizing the rendering code. Bastiaan has been working on that and with reviews from the rest of the team. So it's a very fast moving target. the current rendering code for Godot 4. So I didn't spot too many specific questions for Joan and Bastiaan. So let's move on to the more general purpose, like free for all questions for the whole team. Let's start with some questions we got from Patreons. So one for Juan, the Argentinian one. Has there been any performance comparison done between the 3.2 branch and the 4.0 branch?
On the GPU side, there wasn't many, but it should be about the same. I think it's faster from what I tried. I haven't done any. We need to do like actual proper benchmarks at some point to show that there really has been an improvement. But from the GPU side, it's probably just more efficient because the algorithms are more efficient. But on the CPU side, there really has been a massive improvement. You can just do a lot more objects on screen, and it's really, really much faster than in Godot 3. Because the CPU side has been improved a lot, and because Vulkan itself is much faster when you just do draw calls a lot. So yeah, it's been a lot faster, but we need to do proper benchmarks, I guess, at some point.
Yeah, it will still take some time because we have a lot of loose ends that need to be finalized before we can really start comparing like apples to apples. But most of the changes which have been made were made with like focus on making the performance better. So we don't expect like a huge bad surprise, but there will always be need for extra optimization steps to really make it much faster. So a question, we discussed it briefly early before the call. Maybe Bastiaan, you have some words to share on that. We were asked if we have any plans to update or improve the GridMap node in Godot 4.
Yeah, not that much to say at this point in time. Obviously, we've done a whole bunch of work on the TileMap editor. So all the 2D works, and there's a lot of things that are similar with grid maps, and there are a lot of things that are very different. So at some point, it would be really interesting to know what the community would like to see improved in grid maps, and what sort of features from TileMap we might transfer. I myself, I'm a big fan of GridMap. I use it quite a lot. There's certain things that I could see enhanced, especially around metadata, around adding information into the individual tile so that you can react to that in your game logic. So it becomes easier to know where your characters are walking. What properties are linked to that tile that person is on. But at this point in time, I'm not aware of any concrete things that we've already planned to do around GridMap. So I'd say, it would be really good if people put proposals together. If there aren't already proposals, I haven't looked at those yet. But it's definitely an area that I personally wouldn't mind working on. And I'm pretty sure that some of the others in the team wouldn't mind getting to once we're, through some of the workload that we currently have on our plate for getting Godot 4 to a stable position.
And while you have the mic, I know you've been working on CSG in the past a bit. Like Juan implemented the base feature, and then you've been doing some improvements to that. So we have a question on whether we have any short-term plan for working on level editor functionality similar to ProBuilder, and which is like a Unity add-on. And I know it's something that has been mentioned a lot also, like when we were asking for ideas for Google Summer of Code. So it's probably something where we have yet to figure out what we would want to do, but that's more like picking your brain if you have some ideas in this area.
No, that for me, it's the same as what you're basically saying is I'm a big fan of adding more function. I obviously did the primitive shapes, was I think one of the first big PRs that I added to Godot. I've been, looking at fixing things in CSG, although I haven't used or done much on CSG myself lately. I've been playing around with my own procedural logic. Rodzilla obviously has got a bunch of plugins around that, and Hungry Proton, I think his name is, who have been working on those sort of external tools that are really helpful in building levels inside of Godot. I think it's something that we should address, that we should look into. How much do we want to add in? Obviously, in the past, we've always had a bit of an attitude of we don't want to turn Godot into a 3D modeler. We have very good modelers existing, but using models and then building your levels with that is definitely something that that I think we could do more with in the editor. And of course, one of the things that we've discussed internally, that's a longer term, not short term, but a personal one that I really want to sink my teeth in is actually doing level editing in VR. Because I believe that even for non-VR games, level editing in VR has a lot of benefits as far as spatial awareness is concerned, and being able to manipulate things while on a 2D screen, you get lost real quick. So that's a personal one that I'm hoping that we get ready for, but that's probably a year in the future at least. But yeah, I'd say, again, same thing with like the GridMap is for the community to offer up suggestions and things that they like to see improved. And then as soon as, one of us or, a contributor gets time to actually pick those things up, I think the easier it is to design levels in Godot, the easier it is to make games in Godot. So makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Gilles, I have a question for you. Any chance of getting a cell data resource for tile maps or grid maps? But I guess can start on TileMap.
Yeah, for the TileMap, we're going to add metadatas to, I don't know if the word is cell, but it's likely more tiles. Because you will be able to put metadata directly on the tile set. It's not yet implemented, but it's planned. So as soon as, most likely in 4.0, you will be able to add metadata to tiles in the TileMap. And regarding the grid map, yeah, as Bastiaan said, we still have a lot of work to understand what could be ported from TileMap to grid maps, because there are a lot of people keep asking whether or not we're going to kind of take things from the TileMap editors and tileset editors to the grid map part. But in fact, it's a lot of there's a lot of differences when working with 3D and when working with 2D, because like on 2D it's basically working on images, while with GridMap you're working with 3D models, so the editors cannot be the same at all. So first step is to focus on the TileMap, finish everything, see if there's any more needs there. And then once we're done with that and see what people like and dislike, we could port some of the ideas to grid maps. But I think definitely metadatas is likely something that will be ported to grid maps without issues.
So there's a question that I can ask quickly, because the question was, is the team planning to add multi-window support for working with multiple monitors? So that's already implemented in the 4.0 branch. So you can look in the Godot blog for some older posts from early 2020, where you will find one focusing on that. So the feature is implemented. We're still fixing up some issues, and we still have to decide or experiment with how we can best use this feature to really increase the usability of the editor. But we're leaving that for maybe more Godot 4.1, because we want the feature to be stable first. We will still allow, you can already undock docks and move stuff around, but to really design a multi-window editing experience, we'll probably wait to have some experience and some proposals and implement that when the ideas are ripe. Question for Hugo. there's a question from someone from the Turkish Godot community server, and they're asking what's the process to be added to the official website. So I expect like on the user group and map.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As I replied on the chat, you should send an email to webmaster@godotengine.org with some information about your community, links to your various social media presence like Facebook, Discord, etc. And I will take care of adding the community to the map. And that's all you need to do.
And so, yeah, if you have a local Godot-related community which is not yet on the Godot community map on the website, then you can get in touch with Hugo to get it added. The aim is to have like a good overview of all the local communities so that people know if they're interested in who uses Godot near me, then they can find those communities easily. Here's another question from Patreon for Juan, which is, well, it's more like for Camille, but it's in the middle of the night for him in the US now. So Juan can maybe help answer because it's about physics. We were asked if we have considered adding positional-based dynamics as a way to handle the physics engine instead of the classical implementation. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Juan.
Yeah, positional-based dynamics is a very old way of doing physics. Basically, you use either Verillet or something like that. Instead of simulating like a body and having the linear velocity and the angular velocity, your body is based actually on particles. Like imagine if you had like a box in 3D, like every endpoint of the box is a particle. So instead of having angular velocity, each of them has a linear velocity. And with that, you can simulate physics. If you remember, I think the game Little Big Planet used this in 2008 or 7, I don't know, something like that. So it's actually a very old way of doing physics. I don't think it's very efficient nowadays. Maybe it's okay. I mean, if you have more, maybe for, how is it called, like industrial simulation and these kind of things, it may make a bit more sense. But for game engines, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because then, like, for example, if you have like a sphere or something like that, it's kind of not very easy to simulate. It's only really for polygonal stuff. So yeah, probably not going to do any of that.
So the next question is about internationalization. So I guess that's for me mostly. The question is, Arabic and other complex text layouts features have been a huge win over other editors. Is there more work planned on that front? So to give context for everyone, for Godot 4, we have a contributor, Bruv Zigi, who implemented support for complex text layouts, which enables finally being able to properly write languages such as Arabic or Hebrew, Farsi, many others, which are not as simple to write as just the plain old Latin letters. So where you have to, for example, the font has to change based on which characters are in what position. So this is now well implemented, and ProBuilder also implemented more features for internationalization, such as like the ability to flip some UI elements on a right to left reader context. So like if you are used to having things read from right to left, then you can also have the UI from right to left. So for example, the scene tree dock can be on the other side and stuff like that in Godot. So all these features are implemented. There's still some improvements that are still being worked on. But what will be quite important is once we start making alpha builds, we will really need feedback on all these features to make sure that they work well and to make sure that they all make sense too, because like ProBuilder has done a lot of research on all these languages and how should things be done, but all cultures have different ways of perceiving what should be the right way to handle their specific locale. So we will need feedback to know like if it makes sense to flip these types of elements for this locale and stuff like that. And I also have some more plans for even better internationalization of the editor. So we were discussing enabling to translate project settings and editor settings, and also the names of properties in the inspector. Optionally, because for many developers who can actually be confident with the English-based API, it's always simpler to have the same as like what's in the reference. But for those users who would really benefit for having things translated in their language, we're going to add that as an option. We're still trying to figure out what's the best way to do it. But yeah, the aim is that for Godot 4 or maybe later, would be able to use the editor really like almost fully in your language, including the in-editor class reference, which will also be translatable. So there's a lot of cool features coming in that front. But once we start making alpha builds, if there's any bug, please report it. And if there's any feature that you think it would still be good to add to Godot 4, then you can open a proposal on our proposals repository. So there's another question, which is, will we add support for teams to live collaborate? I don't know, Fabio, if you have some ideas on that, because it kind of makes sense in web-based content. We talked about it at some point, but I don't think we have any concrete idea about how that would look like.
Yeah. So I had some idea that when I added the WebRTC module, that it would be cool to have some form of VoIP, at least the VoIP based, and possibly with that then screen share or stuff like that, and then live editing for the web version. And ideally, so the main problem right now for live collaboration of this kind is that the Godot file system works in a synchronous way, which means that basically access to files are expected to happen immediately, which is not something that is how the web works. And it also causes the problem that while I was investigating the idea of having a cloud-based project, so instead of having it in your browser, you would have it in the cloud for the web version. But the problem would be that you would still need to sync the file system first, and then when you are done editing, resync it back to the cloud folder, which will cause collision. So I think it's a complex topic, and it will need more work in the code itself, and probably some form of rework of the file system. So while it's a very cool idea, I don't think it's something that will be done soon, to be honest. And we haven't discussed that change specifically yet internally, because it's quite a big change. So this is it. As much as I would like to have it, it's quite complicated. So maybe in the future, it's something that we have open, but not for 4.0 for sure, and maybe for future releases.
And maybe a follow-up question for you, since you have talked with some about that. We were asked if Godot will be used in schools.
Oh, yes, I hope so. And actually, I was contacted by some time ago by a professor that was using it in a high school in the US. I was super busy and actually didn't like. He actually even asked me if I could do a stream with his student, but I never got the chance in the end because I was super busy. But he was pretty happy with how he's going. I should get back to him and ask him for feedback. Yeah, reported some issues, which I then fixed. So I think it is still using it, and the students still are. They really hope they do, because I think it's a great tool, and it's also, enable access to, developer tools and some, it will make easier education even in places that doesn't have high performance hardware or stuff like that. I know people have been using it in the Chromebooks, which are quite cheap and can probably also work on other, cheap devices too.
And for Chromebooks, so currently you can use the web version, and we might eventually also make a native Android editor build that can work on Chromebooks, because there's some work which has been done on implementing like all the editor features for Android, which is mainly the question of how to handle like mouse input and keyboard input, like if you plug that into an Android system like Chromebook has. So that's definitely things which are on the table. But yeah, the web editor is very convenient for schools because, as Fabio wrote in several blog posts, it enables them to use Godot without having to install anything. And installing is often like the red line in a school environment, that you cannot make any changes to the school computers. So being able to use tools online is a nice way to work around this sysadmin limitation.
Yeah, and like and in that topic, like I remember when I went to high school and my professor was teaching us how to, helping us installing a live Knoppix distribution so we can use GNU Octave and do math with this program, with the and learn programming, not with this program, but like teaching us programming too. And it was possible because he had knowledge in computer, like more advanced computer science. But a tool like Godot with simple programming that is similar to Python could also be used to teach math and not programming, and that people, see what the formula for physics does in this context of physics for dynamics and mechanics does. And I think it's very good tool to have, like, just visit a website page and it works. So there's no installation, no high tech needed beside the actual knowledge of basic programming. Then when you get into the editor and you want to do your teaching.
Yeah. So I have a question which can be for Joan or Juan, depending on who feels like talking. Will asynchronous caching, I suppose, of shaders be added to Godot 4 for the GLES rendering?
Didn't we just merge that?
So actually there is a pull request for the 3.2 branch that adds caching for GLES 3. So the plan would be that first we make that work, then we make it work for GLES 2, ideally, if that's possible. And then, there's no reason why we would not try to include that in Godot 4 once the GLES renderer is implemented.
And on top of that, the implementation relies on some extensions to GLS, so they may not be available on all devices. So it will probably work fine for desktop, but some other devices may not have the appropriate GLS extensions to be able to cache shaders. So there's nothing we can do in that case.
Mm-hmm. So that will not be a magic solution for low-end mobile.
It should improve things for a lot of people, but not. There's not a magic solution for everyone.
Yeah, probably in Godot 4, the GLES render is going to be a little different than the one in Godot 3, so it may not be that necessary to do it, but I don't know really. We're going to focus on GLES for Godot 4 later when everything else is more stable, so difficult to tell at this point. But yeah, worst case, we can implement it. Also keep in mind that there's, besides doing the asynchronous caching, I think you can do shader caching in GLES3, so that should also probably help in some cases.
Yeah, the PR has asynchronous compilation and caching in GLS3.
So there's a question on Godot's future, which is whether Godot will always remain open source, or if in the future, as it grows, will require developers to pay some royalty as done by other engines. So that's an easy question. I can clarify that right away. Godot is non-profit and will always be non-profit and will always be open source. So there's no, first of all, there's no plan from us to change that, but also there's no real way for us to be able to do that if we wanted to, because the Godot you have currently is already free and open source. So this license cannot be revoked. And most of the work being done on Godot is done by either voluntary contributors who would not want to contribute to a proprietary engine, or paid contributors like all of those you're seeing here, who are paid thanks to donations to a charity which has a clear mission statement that all funds should be used to make open source software. So if we decided, like if the 8 of us decided to change that, then we would stop getting paid, basically, because that would be illegal. So there's definitely no risk of seeing a license change in Godot. And we actually cannot change the license because we don't own the copyright of Godot. It's a shared copyright between all the contributors, and Godot has more than 1,400 contributors or more. So we would have to ask everyone if they agree to changing the license, or we would have to remove their contributions to be able to change the license. So that's, we intentionally created a situation which prevents us from doing a license change because we want users to have this trust that this is not going to happen.
One thing that could happen, anyway, that being said, is maybe some company would like to, for Godot, create their own project and make it not free. But it's basically what video games were made with Godot do, so that's normal.
Yeah, exactly. That could happen, that some people make a proprietary fork, but then it's like them versus the community developing the open source version. So then it's a matter of like who provides the best product and where do users see the value, whether it's in the proprietary changes of that company or the open source common product that we all share. A question from George, maybe, or at least a way in to talk about GDNative. The question was whether it's possible to make contributions to the engine with another language than C++ over ABI. If not, would you ever consider it? So I guess just to channel it into GDNative, the answer to that is, aside from the C# editor, no. Everything is in C++, but GDNative can be used to extend the engine, right?
Yeah, the idea that you can make like plugins in GDNative using either like the plain API or using the C++ bindings. And then you can use like any language that it can use GDNative, including Rust, for instance, or D or Ning. And but I guess for the main engine, you can really contribute anything like for the main repository because everything is statically linked, everything is C++. There's not like any way to add code. Also, it will be a lot of difficulty to maintain this kind of feature. But for plugins or for like third-party tools, you can use GDNative, and I'm working on improving all the build system and the integration with the engine and the tools for building your your plugins, so it's easier to do because there's a lot of barriers in the way in the current version of GDNative that I'm trying to fix them. So you should be able to do plugins like relatively easily with any language that can use the GDNative API.
And yeah, what we can also envision is having first-party plugins. Like we can say, yeah, we officially want to provide this feature, but it's best if it's a plugin and it can be implemented in whatever language can talk with GDNative. And we plan to have a better integration for plugins in the new asset library, so that it's much easier to install them and manage them. And we can envision a system where you want to use a feature, and then there could be a message inside Godot that tells you, like, if you want to use this feature, you can install this plugin with just one click, and then it will just pull in this GDNative code and extend the features of your engine. Like, that's just a rough idea, but once we have all the building blocks, GDNative is easy to use and stable, then we can very easily create this kind of integration to make it, because our aim is still to have like a very solid core engine and then make it very easy for users to add external additional functionality, which can be first party, so that is maintained by us, or third party, doesn't really matter in the end. So a question on the release management, which is whether there will be a Godot 3.2.5 or whether we go straight to Godot 4.0. So I can clarify on that. The way our release system works, so the 3.2 branch and the 4.0 branch are like separate branches. So they are developed in parallel. So that means the current branch on which we work towards Godot 4 was created like when Godot 3.2 was released, and then those two branches diverge, but there's no link between how many 3.2.x releases we're going to have or not before Godot 4 is released. So we're keep going to have 3.2 releases for as long as it makes sense for 3.2 users, which basically means for how long, as long as there will be a huge amount of 3.2 users. So currently we're going to have 3.2.4, and there will definitely be a 0.5 and probably also a 0.6 and maybe more, because we're also trying to release them like more often. The 0.4 release took a long time to develop because that's some big features, but we want to put out releases faster so that you get bug fixes and improvements fast. So even when Godot 4.0 will be released, we will probably keep making maintenance releases for the 3.2 branch, because there will still be a lot of users who have projects in advanced state of development or already published that need bug fixes or changes for some specific platform. So this is really decoupled, and you cannot really estimate when Godot 4 will be out based on the 3.2 releases. And yes, Godot 3.2.5 will likely happen before Godot 4 anyway. Godot 4 is still a long ways off. We hope to have an alpha release within maybe in April. So that means from there to stable, there are still several months afterwards to stabilize everything, implement all the remaining small things we wanted to change before the 4 release, and then let it out. But once that is done, we really aim to have a faster release cycle. So the waiting time for Godot 4.1 or 4.2 and so on should be much lower than this huge gap that we're having now between the 3 branch and the 4. A question for Bastiaan. Should new VR games that we are starting now wait for 4.0 or start now with the current plugins?
I'd start with the current plugins. I don't see any reason why you would wait, especially seeing that you'll be waiting for several months, and you can have several months of development done while there will be changes in the way that certain things work, and you might need to refactor some things if you choose to move your game from Godot 3 to Godot 4, the amount of work that you're able to do in those months will still be very usable, and you'll have a head start. And at this point in time, it really depends on what sort of game you're making. There are lots and lots and lots of VR games that you could currently make in Godot 3 and complete in Godot 3 without any problems. You know, if you want to make a Beat Saber or a Super Hot or any game like that, Godot 3 is more than capable of delivering that type of game. You know, I think that the biggest one where you might run into performance issues is when you target the quest, and looking at how active quest development with Godot right now is. There's a whole bunch of people who are building VR games and VR experiences on the Quest that are running really well. So there are limits, but in the end, it depends on what sort of game you're building, whether you should start now, whether you should wait. But my personal opinion is don't wait. And that applies for VR games and non-VR games the same, right? So yeah, I wouldn't wait. I'm not waiting. I'm already building VR games, so.
A question for Hugo or Gilles. I don't know. I think you both contributed to it. So the answer is yes, but you can maybe expand. Would it be possible to include version control plugins in future versions?
Yes. This is something we had Google Summer of Code done. If I'm not mistaken, there's a PR with all the improvements made to the Git plugin. I mean, both the editor side of the version control interface and on the Git plugin, so that you can use Git to version control your project. The only thing is that for it to be merged, I think we're waiting for the changes to GDNative in 4.0 to be done, and so that the API is stable. But aside from that, yes, there will be improvement there, and the plugins will be obviously made available. We already have a repository for that. I don't know how easy to install right now. You might have to have precompiled binaries. So yes, basically we hope to have this working for 4.2.
And so yeah, that's part of what I was mentioning earlier, that our aim is to make it very easy to install plugins like that. So in the future, so first for the question, the user who asked the question probably was not aware, but it's already possible because those plugins already exist. But the fact that it was asked means that people are not aware. So what can happen in the future is that just like in Visual Studio Code, when you start editing some Python files, then it tells you, do you wish to install the Python plugin? And then you can install it in one click and have new features. So we can probably have future versions of Godot where when it sees that you are using a Git repository for your project, it can suggest, do you wish to install the Git version control system plugin? And then you can say yes or no. So the discoverability of the feature should be improved, and we're making it so that it should be easy to just plug and play such features without having to go to a repository, read the README, understand how to install it, or worse, compile it yourself, and so on. So will Godot 4 be natively supported on Linux ARM? Yes, it's actually already supported. You can already compile Godot for ARM platforms with ARM v7 or ARM 64. it's already been done for a long time for Android, for iOS, for UWP. Now for macOS, there's also ARM64 support, and for Linux, there's also support for that. What doesn't work well is like the build system we have kind of like was conceived for with just x86 in mind. So when you want to compile, you can just choose like 32 bits or 64 bits, which does not really mesh well with trying to cross-compile to an ARM platform, for example. So we're working on fixing that so that it's much easier to just from your Linux system, but we're actually even working on a build system for Windows so that you can compile for Linux on Windows. And then you will be able just from your normal Windows to compile ARM binaries for Linux to export on your handheld device, Raspberry Pi or custom console. So that's definitely in the plans. We just have some variables to adjust and make it like more easy, but the support is already there. It's already possible to compile it with jumping through a few hoops. And this should also come to the 3.2 branch. There's already people who compile Godot for Raspberry Pi and stuff like that. So it's just a few changes away, but we need to do it right so that it's functional and easy to document for everyone. So a question which could be for Juan or Bastiaan or both might have some insight. It's not directly related to Godot, but it's how can one become better as a generalist developer? So like, what's the secret? Are there any books or or tutorial on how to become a generalist programmer?
I would say grow old. Is there, you know, when I look at my personal journey, and I don't know if this applies to Joan as well, you know, it's wanting to do this stuff and just starting at the start and just you know, doing things. I got lucky that I grew up in a time where the demo scene in Europe was, you know, flourishing, and in that way I got a whole bunch of contacts and friends, and you learn from each other, and you just, you know, you get things handed, and you move forward. Nowadays we live in a time where YouTube is filled with tutorial videos on how to do things. You can, you know, there's lots of good books, you know, from CPU gems to, for me, when I did OpenGL Bible and stuff like that. And, you know, you try to build something, you get an idea, and you go through it. And the more things you do, the more areas you start getting experience in, and the more areas you're eventually able to contribute in. So it's, I don't think there's a cookie cutter way of doing it. It's just, you know, put in the work and use this great resource called the internet to find your stuff and start building stuff. That's the best advice that I can give.
Yeah, I think I would recommend focusing on the problem and not on the theory. If you just focus on the theory, you will realize that there's so many books and things that you have to read. And if you focus on the problem, you just kind of like do away with whatever it doesn't interest you and just learn exactly what you need and what to do for. Many times you will be like lost. Like, I have no idea which book to read or which tutorial to read or which documentation to read. But many times you can just go and like go to GitHub and look for source code of something that does whatever you want, and you start from there. And then you can like fill up the gaps with whatever you need from there, instead of just going and reading the whole theory of things. I think that probably is faster than trying to get yourself full of theory, because you can go and learn theory later when you kind of already get the idea of what you need. So it's in my opinion, it works better that way, at least for me.
If I can add something, I'm not at the same level, of course, but like for me, I think one of the important, like a very important thing is that now you have all these resources where you can find bits of codes on Stack Overflow or GitHub and so on. And there are two approaches to this. You can approach to it in a way that you say, okay, I found this piece of code, maybe I even hack it a bit and it works and it's fine. And there's the approach where you, when you use it, you actually try to really understand why it works and what it does, and that kind of helps you, like Juan was saying, like, so if you go to GitHub and you find even a gist that tells you how to do a script, you can just use it, or you can try to understand how it works just because it's fun and you want to know. And if you do that, then your knowledge will just slowly explode.
Slowly
Yeah,
explode. I like that.
I think that is indeed a mistake that a lot of people make. Is they go online, they find a library that does something, or they find a bit of code that does something, and they just use it, and they never look at how it works. And you're not really extending your knowledge this way. While if you actually download a bit of code, a library, whatever it is, and instead of just using it, you try to understand it and you try to rebuild it, that is a really good way to increase your knowledge. So
I'd say, just to follow up on that, it's not necessarily a mistake to use like code without trying to understand it, because we cannot understand everything. It's more like there's an added value if you do have the opportunity and the interest to dig into it. So for example, it's perfectly fine to use Godot without ever reading Godot source code. You can still learn a lot.
I happily use an audio library and never try to understand it because I don't know anything about audio.
But if you do have interest and then decide to dig into a specific topic, then you will definitely like expand your knowledge in this area. And then if you do that with more areas, automatically you become a generalist developer.
Exactly. It's just getting your feet wet.
A general question, which I can answer probably. Is there any chance that the runtime navmesh baking gets backported to 3.2.x? I'm not sure about this exact feature, but there's been a lot of work in the 4.0 branch on navigation improvement. And there's even probably already some attempts to backport it from some contributors. But I think there's still some more work planned on how to make this API evolve. Like it was implemented right when we started developing Godot 4.0 and then not really used because the Godot master branch was not usable. So once we reach alpha again, we're going to get users trying it and get feedback to improve that. So we could add more features to the 3.2 branch now, but we're also kind of waiting on making sure that what we would be adding from the 4.0 branch is what we want to stick to, because it will require like either breaking compatibility or adding like it as a different node names. So like as another option to make like navigation. And you might know, like people complain a lot often about other engines of like, okay, there's this new feature that doesn't work well, and then there's this old feature that is deprecated, so I don't know what to use. So we want to avoid that. So we will keep the old feature and try to make it work while we make sure that the new feature is actually good, and then we can add the new feature as a replacement. But yeah, if there's interest in some stuff, find a contributor interested in it to backport it, test it, report on it, and then eventually we can evaluate if it's mature enough to integrate for a stable release. A question for George. Will Godot be in Google Summer of Code 2021?
Oh, I don't know. We made the application, so it's all on the Google hands now, because we have been part of GSoC for the last 3 years, but there's no guarantee that we're gonna be selected again. Though this year there'll be probably more organizations, so there's more of chance because the students have less time So they're probably going to build more students and more organizations. So likely, but you can never be sure until they announce it.
Yeah, and they will announce it on the 9th of March. So
Yep.
we should know in 2 weeks. But we are still, like, we have published already, like for the application, a list of some ideas of project that could be made, but we still need more ideas. So if you have ideas of stuff that could be done, feel free to share them with us. Just keep in mind that it's some features, or could be like a series of bug fixes, I guess, but something that needs to be a good duration for a student to work on part-time for 3 months. So I think it's like a bit less than 200 hours in total. So it's half the time that projects usually have. So we kind of need to downscope what we usually propose. But it's the first time, so we will see like how it works. But if you have ideas, send them our ways, and then we will evaluate whether they are worth adding to the list. And of course, students can make their own proposal with their own ideas. That's also like, if you have something you really want to do, come talk with us, and we can also see if that's a good idea for your own application. So that's for Bastiaan, with maybe some input from Fabio. Are there plans to support WebAR for mobile phones?
Yes. David Skopek is currently working on the WebXR support that we added recently. And he has started looking at WebAR support. The biggest problem that we have when it comes to AR, and this is the same problem that we are having with OpenXR as well, is that the AR vendors at this point in time are not jumping on board. All the AR vendors that are out there, with the exception of Microsoft with their HoloLens, they're busy on building their own ecosystem, their own SDKs, and they just don't have the bandwidth and the attention to really dive into the standards that are out there right now. So the AR side is generally underdeveloped at this point. Now, hopefully that'll change. Hopefully that'll come around pretty soon. But I think AR is just is not as far along as the VR ecosystems are. But I do know that he is working on AR support in MapXR at the moment. Just to quickly brush on native AR, obviously we did do ARKit 1.0 2 years ago, so that's been part of the iOS build. Apple's gone way beyond what we did, but we just don't have anybody on the iOS side who is really giving that any attention. And the same kind of applies to AR Core, where we've done most of the work to implement the same feature set as ARKit has, but it's something that is not at the top of the priority list at this point in time to finish, especially because we're currently moving it out of the PR that was in the core and into a plugin. The problem that we had with AR Core in the Godot core was that unless everybody only wants to make AR Core games with the Android build, that would be the only possibility left. So I don't think that would make people happy. So that's sort of been lingering along in the background to finish that work. It's just we just don't have enough people who really are into AR and able to spend the time to get that work finished. So hopefully, I'm hoping the AR market will grow and there'll be more people interested in it, and then obviously more work will be done on it. But that's where we're standing at right now. So,
but yeah, maybe if you're into AR and want to contribute to it, then now's a good time, at least for the 3.2 branch, to come and poke at it and see like what has been done, what's left to do. So Bastiaan will also be a bit more available to advise maybe. And
Yes, absolutely.
like many things in Godot, like there's a lot of things which have been in discussions, in work, in progress for years. And it takes time because we really wait for things to be really ripe to be able to provide a really good user experience. And for example, now we are reaching a state where in Godot 3.2.2, we improved the Android plugin system so that it's much easier to distribute Android plugins as like plug and play, and you don't have to recompile manually your export template. You can do it inside the editor very easily. And now in the 3.2.4, we have the same system for iOS, where you can add feature plugins like AirKit support can be used now as a plugin.
Yep.
And the good thing with that is that then the development can be decoupled from the engine development. So once everything, like the plugin system and the camera system is inside Godot, and then you can work on the AirKit plugin or the AR plugin. It's really hard to say, so AR stuff. You can work on that in parallel and make a version for Godot 3.2.4, even if it has already been released. So that's really cool.
Exactly. And again, with WebXR, like I said, David is working on it, and he's mentioned before that any help that people want to give will be more than welcomed, because like me, he's a VR guy, so there's limited access to AR devices at the moment, but it's definitely an area that we want to grow into. So yeah.
So there's an interesting question on scope, workflow. It's something we often discuss with contributors on the Godot chat, but maybe we can have a quick words here. How do we decide whether a feature should be included in the core engine or available as an external plugin? As an example, the navigation mesh is built in. Why compared to others which might be not built in? I don't know if anyone wants to start on that to give some rough guidelines we follow.
Probably depends on how much it is used, how much actually users need it, how much it needs to be integrated with the core of the engine. So navigation needs to integrate a lot with the engine. So that's something that needs to be somehow put inside. If you leave it outside, it's going to be more difficult to do proper integration. Like, for example, generate every time the physics change, updating how the navigation meshes are created and that kind of thing. So it needs to be more or less part of the core. But generally, it depends on whether, like, how easy it is to implement, how much is something that users will need. If it's something that users won't need very often, then it doesn't make sense. We are actually discussing now about moving some stuff outside of the engine, like, for example, video playback and video codecs, because nowadays that's not very used very often. And it should be very easy to just like plug a GDNative video codec and then you just use it or something like that. So these kind of things are very easy to move out of the engine. We'll probably be moving more and more stuff out of the engine rather than just into it. But yeah, as I said, it really depends on how much effort it is to integrate, how much demand there is actually for it, and that kind of things.
And yeah, there are lots of forces at play and also no final decision. Like sometimes someone will propose a feature and we might say, like, that does not seem to be a common enough use case that we want to have it in the engine, so make it as a plugin. But maybe 2 years later, we might change our minds because we have gained more insights into these use cases from more users that need this, or we've seen how tightly coupled it needs to be to the engine, or that it's what the way would be implemented will not be a big hurdle for us to maintain, because everything we integrate into the engine we have to maintain. So it's not just one person making contribution and then tada, the engine is better forever, because every piece of code added is more work for the people in charge of the engine, and that's not necessarily the person who created it the first time. Like, I don't know, some people were asking, why is GridMap a module part of the engine? And the reason is, when it was created, someone came, contributed it as a module, and it seemed useful enough, and there was no alternative way to have it as a plugin back then. So of course it made sense to integrate it, and it probably still makes sense now to integrate it because it's actually quite a core feature for some kinds of games. But then people will ask us, why don't you have a terrain plugin, which is another core feature for other kinds of 3D games? And here the reason is more, we're taking the time to make sure that we can do it the right way, that we cannot just shove in a lot of code and a half-baked feature in the engine to have it, and then have something that people will hate. Like, that's basically, you see TileMap support in Godot. Godot started with okay TileMap support, so people were happy with it, and then other tools started showing that you can actually use TileMaps with a lot less pain, so people started hating Godot's TileMap support. And now Gilles has been working for like 4 or 5 months on improving TileMap support, so it's a massive amount of work to do something good. And so, yeah, we don't want to just integrate something which is not good just for the sake of having something. We want to do things right, and sometimes that means waiting for the ecosystem to experiment with doing plugins, doing their own integrations, and then eventually embrace that and say, okay, that's really cool. That's what we want to have in the engine to satisfy this major use case. That's just some rough pointers. Of course, there's nothing absolute, but yeah, you just have to remember that the more code we have, the more work we have to maintain. Godot is growing a lot, so we always try to keep the scope down. We cannot just do one thing and do it right, because we're a game engine and we're meant to allow people to do all types of games, but still we have to draw some limits because we cannot integrate the whole game dev pipeline natively.
One thing to add, one thing I think that that we just don't have a choice in, and that the community does need to realize, is there's one thing that we can never add into the core, and that is anything that involves proprietary code. So, for instance, AdMob will, or AdSense will never be part of the core. It'll always be a plugin. That's why many of the OpenVR plugins are plugins and not in the core. It's because they require proprietary libraries to be used. So obviously that's, I think, the only situation where it's not a decision, it's not a choice. It is simply the moment that the code that you use to implement a feature requires stuff that is not open source, it doesn't fit in the core. So I think that's one thing to really keep in the back of our heads, and to also make sure that the community understands that, those things are just not possible.
I just wanted to mention, like, regarding the original question, is how we decide what will be implemented and what will not, is basically by discussing together, first of all. Because obviously we all rely, like, on the more or less roughly defined philosophy of the engine, but otherwise it's discussion. It's all contributors that are used to work on specific areas, they know more or less how things can be implemented, how things are going to be can be good for the users. We get feedback from the users, so we discuss all the time. But for the things we kind of agree on how the engine is built, I also wanted to mention we have a documentation page stating roughly how we kind of decide which features are going to be implemented or not. It's called Best Practices for Engine Contributors. So, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it explains that, for example, we implement mainly things that require a problem first, not a solution because it seems cool or something like that. If no one needs something because it's not a problem, it doesn't get implemented. So yeah, it's some principles you can have a look to, and maybe see how we decide as a whole how we if we implement something or not.
That's why it might sometimes seem unfair to some users if you propose something and then we say we don't see the use case as being like important enough, or this is not like, we always ask people, what's the use case? Like, describe your use case with as much detail as you can, because what we want to do is implement stuff that people need for making games, not just, oh, this sounds cool, and if this was implemented, maybe I would be able to do this, which sounds cool. So like, if you're just wanting some feature to potentially do something with it, then we're probably going to say that it's not a priority. That's something, yeah, someone can make a plugin and you can try that. And then if it turns out to be like the new battle royale generator button, then yeah, we can maybe consider integrating that. But otherwise, we always want to focus on features which come from people who have actual needs for their current actual games to be solved, so that you have something that would enable you to actually finish your game the way you envision it. And we consider that, yes, that's something that we should provide. And other users also agree that this feature implemented the way it's proposed would also help them. Then like when this converges, we understand that it's something that is worth implementing. So it's always by discussing with users, by discussing with contributors, that we decide what makes sense. And sometimes we're wrong. So that's why we try to make a plugin system and a GDNative plugin system that enables people to still do stuff, even if we don't agree with it. So yeah, and Bastiaan himself, he was saying that he's been spending a lot of time working on VR support initially, while we were saying, VR, we don't know, it's this kind of niche thing which is never going to take off, and it requires a lot of changes to the engine. It's not the focus because only a fraction of users will use it. But he kept going at it because that was fun. And eventually we agreed on how to integrate that in a way that does not impede on non-VR users and still enables VR users to have a good experience. And now when we talk to vendors in the VR space or users who make VR games, they tell us that we are among the engine with the best VR integration and usability. That is very easy to go from nothing to I have something running on my headset with Godot. So that's how things work. You also have to just scratch your own itch, and if some contributors seem not to agree with you, then that doesn't mean you are not allowed to do what you want to do. That just means there's no guarantee that we're going to merge it at one point in time, but maybe we're going to change our opinion over time while discussing with you and others, and then maybe 2 years later we'll decide that yes, that's definitely something that needs to be done in the engine.
It's always a very different discussion once you see something working, right? That's what people forget, is if you're just talking about it would be really cool to have this feature and it's all talk, it's just discussion, it's very hard to judge, you know, how much work is involved, how much is the engine going to change, how much maintenance is going to require, is the person who's going to build it going to stick around to maintain it. Once you build something and you show that it is something that enables people to build nicer games, and you show that the implementation rhymes with how Godot generally approaches things, and it's a good fit, you can change people's minds. And that's it. You know, the people think that once a decision is made, it's permanent, it's set in stone. It's not. You know, we grow, we evolve. And that goes for everybody in the core team, and that goes for everybody who's contributing, and that goes for everybody who is joining. We all evolve and we all change our minds, and the best way to change it is to show something working. That's, you know, and that's what happened with VR. You know, I convinced these other guys to accept my work by showing something that did things in a way that people liked, and that's the best way to go, in my opinion.
So we'll soon wrap up, I think. Let's see if we have a couple more questions to end. Question, do you guys organize game jams? We have at some point. I organized some Godot community game jams back in 2016 and 2018, I think. It's already so long time ago. But nowadays there are some nice Godot related game jams which are organized by others. There's the Godot Wild Jam, which has a very big and very friendly community. They made we had the organizer of the Godot Wild Jam who gave a talk at the GodotCon last month. So you can find it on the YouTube channel of Godot to have some insights into the story of this jam. And I would say it's such a nice story and such a nice community that I don't see a big need to add our own to that. But we might still at some point like make Godot 4.0 alpha testing jam where we encourage everyone to make something with a test version of Godot to see like what are the bugs and how people like the new features. So that's
and we participate and get bashed because our games is not good.
Exactly.
That's the plan.
So we might organize some stuff in the future, but there's no immediate point. It's also like there's tons of jams. There's some good Godot related ones. There's a lot of non-engine specific ones. So if what you're looking for is a pretext to make games, just go to itch.io on the jam page and find any somewhat big jam that tickles your fancy, and then just get going. There's also the Try Jam, which is every weekend, 3 hours. There's the new game of the month, Gotham.io jam, which is also Godot related, to encourage people to make web-based games with Godot to put on Gotham.io. So lots of opportunities in the jam space. I wish I would have more time to jam myself with all those jams available. And so, yeah, quick question for Juan on the rendering, and maybe also for Joan and Bastiaan, who have been talking about it. What's remaining in the rendering roadmap for Godot 4 and like optimizations, and what's left until we're like, yeah, this is good. We want to make 4.0 with these features.
So I think the main only feature missing is doing properly occlusion cooling. So so Joan can talk about it in a bit, I guess. Then there's some cleanup on the particle system that a few things are missing. There's I think we forgot a Patreon question about supporting accessing individual particle data like coordinates. That's going to be done. Actually, I think already works. You can place particles manually now even in the GPU particles. So that's pretty cool. So the following 2 weeks, maybe 3, I don't know. I took a break from rendering. I'm doing editor stuff. I've been doing a lot of editor stuff, usability improvements and features and different kind of things, which were things that we discussed a long time ago that had to be done, and now they are being done. So the only thing I'm missing editor-wise, I'm missing 2 features editor-wise that I want to complete in the next weeks. I'm going to remake the asset importer. We had a lot of discussions about it because it's not very easy to import 3D assets in Godot. Because right now you just import an asset and you have to inherit it to use it, and that's kind of confusing for many users. Also, inheriting is a bit more limited than instantiating, so that's going to probably change. I mean, you can still do it if you want, but probably what we're going to do is when you import a new asset, you can't just open it by double clicking it. When you do that, you're going to be met with a new screen that lets you like very tightly configure how the asset is imported. with this kind of fine-grained configuration was asked for a lot by users. And then the other thing I want to do that I had noted in my to-do is many users want to be able to export standalone resources or scenes, so they can make them as downloadable for the game. So that's something I also need to be able to do. That's probably not going to take a while. So again, that's probably next 2 weeks. And then the idea is to just wrap up and close whatever is missing on rendering, but it's mostly fixes and things. So the only thing missing, big features, is occlusion cooling, and Joan is going to talk about more about it now, I guess.
Yeah, I've been investigating a bit and doing some research on the topic, and I think I have a good compromise implementation. I did some prototypes already, and the performance is really good. So yeah, all that's left is figure out how to integrate it in the engine, in the sense that how you choose which objects are going to be occluders and which objects are going to be occluded and stuff like that. But the base implementation is not that hard, and it should be easy to integrate. I think, Juan, there's also missing 2D particles or something like that in the rendering, but it shouldn't be too bad. And
yeah, I need to get those working.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else in the rendering apart from fixing all the bugs in 4.0.
So yeah, I hope we can make an like an alpha at some point in April. That would be very nice. Of course, there's other contributors here working on their own stuff, like Gilles is working on TileMap. So I guess, well, and George is working on the new GD script and GDNative. So probably we can aim for having something maybe not entirely complete, but that you can use and give feedback by April. And then the next months are going to be just closing issues, merging PRs, and doing a lot of stabilization work.
Great. Then let's just end with this last question. How to start contributing to the engine? So what's the best way to get started? So we now, since a month, we have a new Godot contributors chat platform, which is listed on the Godot community page. So it's like the URL is chat.godotengine.org. So that's dedicated for people who want to contribute to the engine. So you can come there and join the channels that match your areas of interest. So we have channels for, like, we have a general channel, but we have channels for rendering, for scripting, for audio. And then you can see there what people are working on, participate in discussion, help review pull requests related to these areas. Like, reviewing pull requests is a great way to get familiar with how Godot works and how people approach fixing bugs, for example. That gives you good insights into how things are connected with each other. And we have a channel also which is called New Contributors, where you can ask any questions and receive guidance on what you could do depending on your interests. And there will always be, depending on the time zone, people around to hopefully provide some advice. So if you're itching to contribute to Godot, just join that chat and talk with us. So I think that's it for this live Q&A. That was 90 minutes, so I think it's good time to wrap up and see you all in the next Q&A in a month or a bit more. And we're going to see who else to invite. Like, we're probably going to try to rotate again. Like, this time we had new contributors, and next time we're probably also going to go back to a later time span so that it's more suitable for people in the Western Hemisphere. So we'll see who can be there for the next Q&A. And as always, if you have any kind of feedback on, like, the format of the Q&A, what you would like us to cover, then feel free to let us know on Twitter, on the Godot contributors chat, or in the comments. So we can improve the format to make it a nice community event where we can all exchange. So that's it. Thanks to all contributors who are there, and thanks everyone on the chat for your nice questions and the lively chat discussion.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye,
See you
everyone.
later.
Bye everyone. Thanks.
Bye bye.